Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is how, on the eve of Passover, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu jumped onto his plane and flew off to Moscow. He returned later that same day. Now, the eve of Passover is arguably the busiest day of the year in Israel. It's true for every sector of Israeli life, politics included. Busier than even the eve of Rosh Hashanah or the eve of Yom Kippur. Between cleaning and cooking and preparing for Seder, guests, on Passover Eve, the word hectic takes on whole new dimensions. And if you're not one of the cleaning ones, you're certainly one of the cooking ones. If you're not one of those, you're part of the traveling group. So it's also the busiest travel day in Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport. And yet, Netanyahu flew off to visit Putin. He did it because he had to. The trip took on the status of high risk, even near crisis. A trip had been planned to Russia, but without the urgency. That trip was supposed to be a quick and practical and pro forma visit that dealt with weapons and ISIS and pension for the million-plus Russian immigrants who now live in Israel. The agenda was changed when, earlier that week, a Russian fighter jet was scrambled to intercept an Israeli jet. And the week before that, Israeli jets were targeted by Russian jets. Israel did not respond to these aggressive Russian moves. The Air Force showed maturity by not responding and not running the risk of engaging in a major international crisis. On his trip to Moscow, Netanyahu was accompanied by the head of the Israeli Air Force, Major General Amir Eshel, as well as his military advisor, Brigadier General Eliezer Toledano. These issues between air forces should not have happened at all, because in September in 2015, in a series of top-secret meetings that took place in Tel Aviv, a special mode of communication was set up between Israel and Russia to handle and resolve those issues exactly. The objective of the September meetings was to prevent any mishap and to make certain that Israel and Russia would not fly over one another in Syria. Russia and Israel even exchanged specially designated and encrypted cell phones. But something happened. The system was not working. It was all supposed to be a coordinated effort. In fact, Russia agreed not to share any of Israel's information or movements with Assad or with Iran or with Hezbollah. And then, right before Passover, it all seemed to collapse. Instead of avoiding mishaps, the potential for a mishap was looming large and ominous. So the Prime Minister of Israel headed straight into, so to speak, the lion's den. The situation needed to be dealt with, straightened out, resolved immediately. The stakes in the air and around Syria is a very high set of stakes. The atmosphere is very tense always. 14 air forces fly in the Syrian skies. 14. That fact alone is cause for worry. Mistakes are bound to happen. The United States, Britain, Canada, France, Australia, Russia, Israel, China, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, Bahrain, Turkey, and of course Syria all fly around in Syria. They're all bound to bounce up against one another, and it is inevitable that some country at some time will fly out of the bounds. That's what happened between Russia and Turkey when Turkey shot down the Russian plane. The action resulted in a flaming crash of Turkish-Russian relations. But why now? Why Israel and Russia? The meeting between Putin and Netanyahu lasted for about 3 hours. In the course of that meeting, Eshel and Toledano broke off with their Russian counterparts, the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and his military team. Explaining the urgency of his pre-Passover flight to Russia, the Israeli Prime Minister said that, quote, there have been problems, unquote, between Israel and Russia in Syria. He was, of course, referring to the freedom of Israel to operate in Syria without risk of Russian intervention. Netanyahu went further and said that if you don't deal with the friction, it could develop into something more serious. At the conclusion of the meeting, Netanyahu briefed reporters saying, I came here with one main goal, to strengthen the security coordination between us so as to avoid mishaps, misunderstandings, and unnecessary confrontations. The official statement from his office read, "I was setting the task of strengthening coordination in security sphere between Russia and Israel in order to prevent misapprehension and incidents." That statement also made clear that the military chiefs have already met and made progress. Putin is said to have been shocked by the information that Russian planes were aggressively engaging with Israeli planes over Syria. According to sources, he said that he heard it for the first time from Netanyahu in the meeting. I doubt that is true. Russia has a series of both ongoing and evolving agendas for the Middle East. Russia is very good at teasing out information and intelligence, maybe better than any other nation. This game that they initiated and were playing with Israel had an objective. Putin wanted to see how Israel would respond. He wanted to know how quickly Israel would be able to react. He needed to know how Israel reacted and the messaging sequence that spread from the genesis of each incident. The Russians got what they wanted. They now have a font of information they sought to obtain. For now, at least, the game is over. There has been much discussion about the coalition in Israel and the Prime Minister Netanyahu's firing of Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon and taking on a new one. The entire purpose of these moves is to stabilize his government that needs at least 60-plus MKs to stay in power. Before this change, Netanyahu was hanging on to a very, very narrow coalition of only 61. The government of Bibi Netanyahu just got a stronger, more stable sense. Lieberman and his party of 6 have agreed to join the Netanyahu coalition. That decision will further guarantee Netanyahu's positions and power. In joining the coalition, Lieberman will become the defense minister, and his party will receive several other governmental positions. The additional 6 Knesset seats give Netanyahu a total of 67 seats, 7 more than the majority he needs to hang on as prime minister. The dynamics of this expanded coalition pushes the Netanyahu government further to the right, but it also insulates the prime minister from any harm the 2 religious parties in his coalition can do to him. He can now survive if either of those 2 parties leave. He has the votes. Netanyahu was not only negotiating with Lieberman, he was also negotiating with Labor, with Herzog. And they almost succeeded in joining the coalition too. But as they say, almost doesn't count. Labor has 24 Knesset seats. Had they joined with the Netanyahu government, they would have received the foreign ministry portfolio. That move would have put Netanyahu in the center-left position, stabilizing him even more with 85 seats. And if both would have joined, that is, Lieberman and Labor, if they would have joined the coalition, that would have made it 91 seats. Some things, it seems, are just not meant to be. The columns we will look at today are about this very topic, and they will give you a different point of view about the Prime Minister's decision. Coming up, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column from the New York Times. It's dated May 21st, online, and was in the Sunday Review section on May 22nd. The column is written by Ronen Bergman. Ronen Bergman is a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine and a senior correspondent for military and intelligence affairs for Yediot Achronot. He is at work on the history of the Mossad. Ronen Bergman is an extremely probing and thoughtful writer. He is also an investigative journalist. Very few people are actually successful at writing insightful columns and long-form journalism pieces. This column, deals with Netanyahu and his ousting of the defense minister and the bringing in of Lieberman into the coalition. Here is how he begins the piece, datelined Tel Aviv. In most countries, the political class supervises the defense establishment and restrains its leaders from violating human rights or pursuing dangerous, aggressive policies. In Israel, the opposite is happening. Here, politicians blatantly trample the state's values and laws and seek belligerent solutions, while the chiefs of the Israeli Defense Forces and the heads of the intelligence agencies try to calm and restrain them. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's offer last week of the post of defense minister to Avigdor Lieberman, a pugnacious, ultra-nationalist politician, is the latest act in the war between Mr. Netanyahu and the military and intelligence leaders. A conflict that has no end in sight but could further erode the rule of law and human rights or lead to a dangerous, superfluous military campaign. The Prime Minister sees the defense establishment as a competitor to his authority and an opponent to his goals. Putting Mr. Lieberman, an impulsive and reckless extremist, in charge of the military is a clear signal that the generals and the intelligence chiefs' opposition will no longer be tolerated. Mr. Lieberman is known for ruthlessly quashing people who hold opposing views. Bergman is making his point very clear. He dislikes the Prime Minister and thinks that the decision to replace Defense Minister Yalom with Lieberman is a mistake. That may all be true, but the former, now ousted Defense Minister is also a politician, although he was once the Chief of Staff. And the reality is that the military has to remain independent. They must perform and conform to the desires of the elected leadership. And in this case, everyone, even the defense minister, serves at the will and desire of the prime minister. If he has problems with that, he should have resigned himself earlier and not have been asked to step down. The problem with some of these columns is that they push an idea ad infinitum, or at least ad hilarium. They push an argument to the extreme. This is how Bergman concludes. He actually raises the issue of a coup d'etat. In some conversations I've had recently with high-ranking officers, Mr. Lieberman's appointment as defense minister, the possibility of a military coup has been raised, but only with a smile. It remains unlikely. The biggest challenge to the relationship between the right-wing politicians and the top brass will come if Mr. Lieberman tries to get the army to do the kinds of things he has enthusiastically proposed in the past. What would the army and the intelligence chiefs do if the new minister issued instructions not to prosecute people who committed crimes like Elor Azariah in Hebron? Or if Lieberman's demands, as he has done in the past, that Israel assassinate Hamas leaders if they do not return the remains of fallen Israeli soldiers, or conquer Gaza, or bomb the Aswan Dam, as he has said Israel would do if it ever faced war with Egypt. Will they execute his orders, or refuse because they can grasp the dimension of the catastrophe that such actions would bring about and suffer the personal consequences? Bergman is so off base. To even suggest with a smile that a coup is possible is ridiculous. And to suggest that Lieberman would do something that does not have the cabinet approval is inane. Besides, it is also all hypothetical. And, like most politicians, Lieberman is filled with bluster and political hot air. Let's see what happens. After all, Netanyahu could fire Lieberman. And Lieberman also already knows how to resign when he cannot get what he wants. Second up is an interview, not a column. It's an interview with Dan Meridor, former finance minister under Bibi in his first ministry and one of the chosen youth. These were the children of the founders of the right-wing leadership: Benny Begin, Dan Meridor, Ehud Olmert, Limor Livnat. Netanyahu was not really part of that group. He was on the periphery. He was an outsider. Netanyahu's father was never really accepted into the inner circle of that group. Now the central leader is Bibi, while the other young stars have become outsiders. Meridor shares with us that he too was extracted from power, just like former defense minister Moshe Ya'alon. The interview was published in Yediot Ahronot on May 22, 2016. Here is how the short interview with Meridor begins. The interviewer sets the context. Former finance minister Dan Meridor attacked Prime Minister Netanyahu for his treatment of former defense minister Moshe Ya'alon. I recall that approximately a year after I was appointed Minister of Finance in Netanyahu's first government, I also found myself without a job. It appears that this is a pattern and behavioral sequence. Meridor also discussed the growing extremism in Likud, which Ya'alon alluded to in his resignation speech. You basically don't see anyone who's doing something in leadership to stop it. This is a serious process that needs to be stopped. It is a shame that when someone tries to stop it, he finds himself on the other side, while others are becoming more powerful. He added, Ya'alon was ready to look reality in the eyes directly and understand these phenomenon. He tried to stop it and to lead and not to be led by the polls and coalitions. The reality is that it hurts when you're sacked. There's no question about that. It hurts when you're sacked when you're doing a good job, and that hurts too. But this is politics, and there are other factors at play. Only one of them is the job. Others include power, limelight, coalition, and more. In this case, with Ya'alon, the straw which broke the camel's back for Netanyahu was when Ya'alon told his military officers and leadership that they should follow their conscience and not the dictates of political leadership. That is tantamount to treason and a coup. We are not talking about moral behavior. That was not what Ya'alon said. He opened an ugly can of worms by suggesting that officers know better than the political leadership and that they should follow their senses and not the orders of the democratically elected. That was why Ya'alon had to be sacked. Simple as that. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. This week, I want to show you 3 cartoons. All the cartoons are covering the same theme. The theme is the TSA and security in our airports. They are each hilarious and unfortunately very biting. Sometimes I like to break out of the box and not simply deal with Jewish issues or Israel and the Middle East. Here's an example that affects all of us. The first cartoon is by Scott Stannis, and it was published on May 20th, 2016. It's from the Tribune News Service and was published in the Chicago Tribune. The cartoon is a play on Dante's great work, The Inferno, where he describes the various circles of hell. He's giving directions to a monk who is now being punished and must go to the last circle of hell, the TSA. The friar says, "Too mean, too mean." Dante's Divine Comedy is an epic poem. He's guided by the Roman poet Virgil through the 9 levels of hell. It is written in the 14th century. The 9th and lowest circle is treachery, and this poor monk is now on his way there. The next cartoon is by Gary Varvel and was published on May 20th, 2016 in Creator Syndicate and was published actually in the Indianapolis Star. The parents are giving their luggage to their son at the airport departure zone. The father says to the son, "Hold our place in the TSA line." The son responds, "But our flight does not leave until next month." This is just one of dozens of cartoons using the same theme. Most common was that an elderly man was being checked by the TSA, and the standard comment he got from others in line was, "He's been online for 40 years, or 60 years, or 70 years. Each artist had a different number. This last cartoon is by Gary Markstein and was published in Creator Syndicate on May 21st, 2016. A family is in line waiting for the TSA check. A little boy asks his father, "Dad, what does TSA stand for?" The father answers, "Totally slow always." In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. The Pope has taken Western countries to task about, as he calls it, their cultural colonialism. He's speaking especially about the United States. The Pope has been very critical of the desire of Western countries to impose democracy on others without relating to or concerning itself with local cultures. In an interview with the French Catholic paper La Croix, the Pope said, "Faced with current Islamist terrorism, we should question the way a model of democracy that was too Western was exported to countries where there was a strong power, as in Iraq or Libya, where there was a tribal structure. We cannot advance without taking these cultures into account. As a Libyan said some time ago, we used to have one Gaddafi, now we have 50 of them." The Pope is not anti-democracy. He's simply suggesting that respect for local culture will more effectively achieve the end results of democracy without creating a buildup of resentment. On Islam, the Pope said that he does not think that Europe or the West is anti-Islam. Rather, they're anti-ISIS. There's a huge difference. The Arab world has a very harsh approach towards Palestinians. Since last summer, Jordan has not permitted Palestinians from Gaza to pass through Jordan. For the past several years, Egypt has not permitted the movement of Gazans either. The most ironic element of the story is that while Israel is permitting more and more Palestinians exit and transfer over Israel, they can't leave because they have no place to go. Jordan will not let them in, neither will Egypt. Because of Jordan, Gazans are stuck in Gaza. The reasons should be obvious. In the eyes of the Jordanians, Gazans are thought to be terrorists and affiliated with Hamas. Gazans who are attempting to go to work, to the hospital, to the university, cannot even when their destination is Jordan. A Jordanian university may accept a student from Gaza, but that same student will not be able to attend the university because of the Jordanian policy. This is a problem. It is not a problem caused by Israel. Saudi Arabia has threatened to pull out their U.S. investments and sell their ownership of U.S. companies if the United States permits 9/11 victims to sue the Gulf oil state. This is a serious threat, and people are rightly taking it seriously. And yet, it is also an empty threat as I see it, and would prove to be a silly move. Saudi Arabian interests in the United States total about $750 billion. Selling all of that over a period of a short or a few months will cause a huge loss for the Saudis. Actually, good estimates say that if the Saudis sell their U.S. assets, they will take more than a 50% loss on the sell. That would mean $750 billion will melt away and be reduced to something just over $300 billion. That is a huge loss, a colossal failure. The Saudis own $117 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds. Even if they liquidate all the bonds overnight, it will not have a huge impact. The daily Treasury market is about $500 billion. China sold off all of their bonds in order to raise cash, and it didn't impact the market at all. If Saudi Arabia did choose to try to sell their interests, there would be a long line of interested people excited about picking up those investments at a price way below market value. Many of those new buyers may actually be Americans. If the Saudis follow through with their plan, it will backfire, and the result may actually be better off for the United States. A new ISIS video has been posted by Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, the spokesperson of ISIS. He is calling on followers to strike as many targets as possible during the Muslim month of Ramadan. The nearly 30-minute-long message was very explicit, calling on ISIS supporters to advance the cause everywhere they live. Ramadan is a month-long fast dedicated to introspection. It begins for most Muslims on June 6th of this year and ends on July 5th. Muslims fast during the day and eat at night after sundown. Al-Adnani said, Ramadan is coming, the month of attacks and jihad, the month of conquest. So be prepared and be on alert, and make sure that every one of you spends Ramadan, in the name of God on the attack, requesting from God that Ramadan, God willing, be a month of calamity on the non-believers anywhere, especially by those soldiers and supporters of the caliphate in Europe and America. The smallest action you do in their heartland is better and more enduring to us than what you would if you were with us. If one of you hoped to reach the Islamic State, we wish we were in your place to punish the Crusaders day and night. These comments are a call to arms for followers and lone wolves to do whatever they can, however they can, wherever they live. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. Did you know there is no word for politics in Hebrew? We use the word politica, which is simply the Hebraization of the English. The word politics comes from the Greek. It means of the people or pertaining to the people. Plato's seminal work, The Republic, and Aristotle's great work, Politics, all speak of the power of the people. Republic also means of the people. In Hebrew, there are words for governing, for leadership, for power, for the people, but there is no word for the active interplay between power, the people, and the leadership of a society, which is, of course, what politics is all about. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.